There is a particular kind of pressure that has no name in any coaching manual. It does not live in the film room or the weight room or the chalk talk before a playoff game. It lives in the space between what a man has already accomplished and what he still believes he owes the game. LeBron James arrived at the 2025-26 season carrying that pressure in both hands. Not the pressure of proving himself, that argument closed years ago, but something quieter and more complicated. The pressure of continuing, of showing up for a 23rd season in a league that had never seen anyone reach this latitude, and doing it with a body that had finally, unavoidably, begun to negotiate its own terms. When sciatica sidelined him before he played a single minute of the new campaign, the silence around his absence said more than any injury report could. This was not a sprained ankle or a bruised knee. This was the nervous system of a 41-year-old man, sending a message that even the most disciplined preparation in professional sports history could not fully intercept. He returned. Of course he returned. But the return came with an acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable even 3 years prior. LeBron James could no longer play every game on the schedule. Load management, a concept that had once felt like a luxury reserved for younger stars protecting their primes, became a medical reality for the king himself. Back-to-backs got monitored. The Lakers' training staff began making calls that the organization would never have dared make in previous seasons. And somewhere inside all of that recalibration, LeBron made a private peace with a version of himself that was different from every version that had come before. Not lesser, not finished, just different. The man who had redefined what an NBA player could be at 35, then at 38, then at 40, was now doing something even more difficult than any of those reinventions. He was learning, in real time and in public, how to carry the weight of a 23rd season without pretending it weighed nothing at all. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, consider subscribing. There is more where this came from. There is a housing project in Akron, Ohio that does not appear on any basketball pilgrimage map. No bronze marker, no commemorative court, no tourism infrastructure built around what began there. But everything that made 23 NBA seasons possible was forged in that specific geography, in the instability, the scarcity, and the particular kind of clarity that comes when a child understands early that the margin for error in his life is essentially zero. LeBron James did not grow up with a blueprint for longevity. He grew up with a blueprint for survival. And it turns out those two things, when combined with generational athletic gifts and an almost biological obsession with self-improvement, produced something the sport had never quite seen before. The hunger that drove him through high school gymnasiums in Ohio, through the ESPN2 broadcasts that turned a teenager into a national conversation, through the weight of being drafted first overall at 18, with an entire franchise's resurrection loaded onto his shoulders, that hunger never metabolized into comfort. It stayed raw, it stayed useful, and it became the engine that is still running in year 23. What Akron gave LeBron that no coaching staff ever could was an understanding of impermanence. Nothing in his early life was guaranteed to last. Stability was something other families seemed to have, not something he could take for granted. And so he built his own methodically, deliberately, brick by brick, through basketball first, and then through the empire that basketball made possible. Maverick Carter, his closest business partner, and the man who would eventually sit on a yacht in the south of France consulting on a global league, was part of that original architecture. Two kids from Akron who understood that the window the sport was offering them was finite, and that every single decision inside that window carried consequences that would echo long after the last game was played. That foundational understanding that nothing is permanent unless you build it to last is the thread that connects the housing project in Ohio to a 23rd season in Los Angeles that nobody in the history of professional basketball had ever reached. Every institution has a preferred version of its stars, a sanitized, manageable, marketable addition that fits cleanly into the existing power structure without disrupting the architecture too severely. The NBA, for all its genuine embrace of player empowerment, is no different. And LeBron James spent 2 decades in a quiet, continuous negotiation with that preference, never fully submitting to it, never openly declaring war against it, but consistently, methodically expanding the space that a player was allowed to occupy inside the league's ecosystem. He changed teams on his own terms when the basketball logic demanded it. He built a business empire while still in uniform, which no player of his generation had attempted at the same scale. He co-founded a production company, took equity stakes in Liverpool FC, became a formal partner in Fenway Sports Group, the first black partner in that ownership group's history, and did all of it while averaging the kind of numbers that kept every conversation about his relevance anchored to what he was doing between the lines. The system wanted a player. LeBron decided to become something the system had no existing category for. The coaching dimension of this story is equally layered across Cleveland, Miami, Cleveland again, and Los Angeles. Through 2 separate stints, LeBron played under philosophies that range from isolation-heavy to motion-based, from defensive-first cultures to wide-open offensive systems built almost entirely around his decision-making. Each environment demanded a different version of him. Each version he delivered, but what the institutional record actually shows, when you trace it carefully, is that the systems did not shape LeBron so much as LeBron shaped the systems around him. Offensive schemes evolved to accommodate his court vision. Roster construction conversations in every front office he entered eventually bent toward what maximized his specific skill set at that specific moment in his career. And now, in year 23, playing alongside Luka Dončić on a Lakers roster built explicitly around a younger franchise cornerstone, LeBron is doing something that requires more institutional self-awareness than anything he has attempted before fitting himself into a system that was not constructed with him at the center and making it work anyway. There is a moment in every great athlete's career when physical dominance alone can no longer carry the full weight of performance. The body, regardless of how meticulously it has been maintained, begins to operate on a slightly different timeline than it did a decade earlier. The separating factor, the thing that distinguishes the players who navigate that transition gracefully from the ones who don't, is basketball intelligence. The ability to see the game at a speed that the legs no longer need to match. LeBron James has been building toward this version of himself for years, not as a concession to age, but as a deliberate evolution that he began engineering long before the calendar made it necessary. The LeBron James playing in year 23 is running off significantly fewer screens as a primary ball handler than any recent version of himself. The usage rate has dropped sharply. The isolation sequences that once defined entire fourth quarters have been redistributed to Luka Dončić, and LeBron has settled into a role that demands something more subtle and, in many ways, more difficult than raw dominance. He is now the smartest player on a roster built around someone else's brilliance. What makes this tactical reinvention genuinely remarkable is the specificity of its execution. LeBron is moving more off the ball than at any point in his Lakers tenure, cutting through defensive rotations that younger players simply do not read quickly enough to exploit, spotting up in spaces that open precisely because Dončić commands so much defensive attention, and making playmaking decisions from secondary positions that keep the offense unpredictable without requiring him to initiate every sequence. His assist numbers remain elite top 10 in the entire league, which means the court vision that was always his most underappreciated asset has not eroded at all. What has changed is the context in which it operates. He is no longer the sun around which everything orbits. He is something rarer, and for a player of his stature, considerably harder to become a gravitational force that makes the primary stars shine brighter, simply by knowing exactly where to stand, when to move, and when to let someone else take the shot. The scoring streak ended on an otherwise unremarkable evening. 1,297 consecutive games with double digits, a record so far beyond anything any other player had approached that the statistical distance itself had become part of the mythology. And then an 8-point night quietly closed the book on it. For most professional basketball players, 8 points is a perfectly acceptable contribution. A solid rotation night, nothing that warrants a second conversation, but records of that magnitude do not end without carrying weight. And the weight of that particular evening was not really about the 8 points. It was about what the streak had represented, an unbroken thread of consistency stretching back across 2 decades, through championship runs and early exits, through traded teammates and changed addresses, through every physical setback the body had thrown at him. When it ended, something that had felt permanent revealed itself as finite. And finite, for LeBron James, is a word that carries implications far beyond basketball statistics. The fractures kept coming. The All-Star starting not an unbroken chain since his second season in the league slipped away for the first time in over 2 decades. 9th in Western Conference voting, partly because the sciatica had trimmed his early season resume, partly because the current statistical line no longer screams traditional starter in a conference stacked with younger, fresher names. The officiating controversies added another layer sequences, where physical contact with referees went undisciplined in ways that generated genuine questions about consistency and institutional protection. And then came the rule change suggestion on his own podcast. floating FIBA-style adjustments to the NBA game, which arrived into a media environment primed to read everything a 1-year-old superstar says through the lens of self-preservation. Each fracture, taken individually, was manageable. Taken together across a single season, they painted a portrait of a man navigating the most turbulent chapter of a career that had, for 2 decades, looked almost frictionless from the outside. What do you think shaped this version of LeBron more? The external pressures accumulating around him, or the internal standards he has never once lowered for himself? Leave your thoughts below. The public version of LeBron James is the one that exists under arena lights, the triple-doubles, the fourth-quarter sequences, the post-game podium, but the version that made a 23rd NBA season athletically possible is the one that almost nobody sees. The 4 a.m. recovery sessions, the hyperbaric chamber, the sleep optimization protocols that LeBron has spoken about with the same seriousness that most coaches reserve for defensive schemes, the nutritional architecture that his body has operated on for years, a disciplined, precise approach to fuel and recovery that treats the human body less like a vehicle and more like an instrument requiring constant expansive. He has reportedly spent over $1 million annually on his body across multiple seasons. That number sounds extraordinary until you consider what the body it maintains has generated in return, not just financially, but in terms of sustained competitive relevance at an age when every other player of his generation has long since moved into broadcast booths and front office roles. The investment is not vanity. It is the infrastructure underneath everything the public gets to watch. What is equally significant is the psychological dimension of that preparation. Maintaining the motivation to put in that level of unseen work in year 23, when the records are already set, when the legacy is already secured, when every reasonable argument for stepping away from the grind has been available for at least 3 seasons, requires something that physical conditioning alone cannot produce. It requires a relationship with the process itself that goes beyond outcomes. LeBron has talked about this in fragments across various interviews and podcast appearances. The idea that the preparation is not merely a means to an end, but a practice that carries its own meaning, independent of what happens on the scoreboard. The men who last in professional sport at the highest level always arrive at this understanding eventually. The ones who last as long as LeBron has are the ones who arrived at it early and never let it go. Every morning that begins before the arena opens, every recovery session that nobody photographs, every dietary decision made in private, those are the actual building blocks of a 23rd season. The games are just where the results get displayed. Maverick Carter has never averaged a single NBA minute. He has never taken a playoff shot or anchored a defensive rotation. But trace the architecture of LeBron James's career carefully enough, and you begin to understand that Carter is perhaps the most important relationship in the entire story. 2 teenagers from Akron who made a silent agreement early that the opportunity basketball was offering would be treated as a platform rather than a destination. That agreement has held for over 2 decades through marketing deals and production companies, through Liverpool FC equity stakes and Fenway Sports Group partnerships, through yacht meetings in the south of France, with Serbian super agents consulting on global leagues that have the potential to reshape professional basketball's entire business model. When Maverick Carter rejoined Project B as an advisor and board director in March of 2026, specifically to assist with men's recruitment, he was not making a move independent of LeBron's orbit. He was extending it. The business partnership between these 2 men from Akron has always operated as a single, unified intelligence. 2 perspectives, 1 long-term vision, and a patience for the right moment that most institutional investors would struggle to replicate. The Dončić dimension of this season's human story is quieter but equally significant. Coming into year 23, alongside a player who represents the franchise's future, required a particular kind of relational generosity that does not show up in any box score. LeBron has been the gravitational center of every roster he has inhabited since he was 18 years old, stepping into a supporting architecture around a 26-year-old Slovenian who the Lakers acquired specifically to reset their championship timeline. Asked something of him that pure talent could never answer it. Asked for ego management at the highest professional level. And then there is Cleveland. The return to Ohio this season, complete with a pregame tribute that left LeBron visibly moved on the sideline, captured something that all the contract discussions and business ventures and global league consultations cannot fully contain. After the game, he talked about cherishing every matchup because it could be his last. That sentence spoken quietly in a visiting locker room in the city where everything began for him professionally, carried the particular weight of a man who has started to hold each remaining chapter of his career with considerably more tenderness than the ones that came before. Pick any random Tuesday night in the middle of this season, and the box score tells one story. Pick the right night, and it tells something else entirely. The triple-double against the Miami Heat, 19 points, 15 rebounds, 10 assists, was one of those nights where the full architecture of what LeBron James has become as a basketball player was visible in a single performance. Not because the numbers were historically staggering by his own standards. They were not. But because of the specific way each number was produced. The points came not from isolation sequences or primary ball handler advantages, but from cut-sharp, precisely timed movements through defensive rotations that younger players miss because they have not yet learned to read the geometry of a defense at game speed. The rebounds came from positioning decisions made before the shot was even released, an anticipatory intelligence that no amount of athleticism can substitute for. And the assists, the 10 assists that completed the line, came from a playmaking vocabulary so deep and so refined. After 23 seasons, the defenders who have studied him for years still cannot fully predict what he will do with the ball in transition. The Cleveland return earlier in the season operated on a different register entirely. This was not a performance decoded through advanced metrics or tactical analysis. This was a human being playing basketball in the city that first understood what he was, in front of people who had loved him and lost him and welcomed him back, and now understood, in the particular way that sports crowds understand things without being told, that the remaining visits were becoming numbered. The pregame tribute played on the arena screen, and LeBron stood on the sideline and did not look away. After the game, in the quiet of a visiting locker room, he said he was cherishing every matchup because it could be his last. That sentence was not crafted for media consumption. It was the unguarded admission of a man who has spent 23 seasons moving at full speed and has finally, in this last stretch, allowed himself to slow down just enough to feel what is actually passing. Those are the performances that no statistical model captures, the ones where the game itself becomes secondary to the gravity of the moment it is being played inside. The 2025-26 season will end the way all seasons end, with a final buzzer, a locker room conversation, and a summer that arrives before anyone is fully ready for it. But this particular summer carries a weight that no previous offseason in LeBron James's career has quite matched. The contract expires. The player option is gone. The unrestricted free agency that opens in front of him is not the kind that comes with a clear destination already understood by everyone in the league. The Lakers hold his bird rights and can offer the maximum, but a full max contract strains the roster construction around Dončić in ways that the front office cannot easily absorb. The alternatives, a contender at the mid-level exception, a sentimental Cavaliers reunion, a Warriors pivot for one final ring chase, are not rumor mill noise. They are genuine structural possibilities that will require real decisions from a man who has never made a consequential career move without thinking at least 5 years past the immediate outcome. And threading through all of it, quietly but with increasing volume, is the retirement conversation that LeBron himself has kept deliberately unresolved. The end is sooner than later, he has said. A couple more years is possible if the love for the game stays intact. When he knows, the world will know. Not a moment before. What comes after LeBron James is a question the NBA has been avoiding answering seriously for the better part of a decade. And the avoidance is entirely understandable. Adam Silver has said publicly that he is not prepared for a post-LeBron era. The commissioner has built an entire global expansion strategy. NBA Europe targeting a 2027 to 2028 launch, FIBA partnerships, regular season games penciled into Manchester and Paris and Berlin that carries LeBron's cultural footprint even in his absence, because the internationalization of basketball that Silver is now institutionalizing is inseparable from the global audience that LeBron's career helped build. And somewhere across the Atlantic, Project B is assembling its touring circuit, with Maverick Carter in the boardroom and Misko Rajnato's European network providing the connective tissue. The next chapter of basketball's global story is being written right now, in real time. And the man whose career made that story possible is still playing, still averaging a 20.7 assist line at 41, still making cuts that younger players cannot read, still carrying Akron in both hands every time he steps onto the floor. Season 23 is not a farewell. It is not a victory lap. It is the final act of the most expansive career the sport has ever produced. Still unfolding, still surprising, still entirely unwilling to be defined by anyone other than the man living it. If this story moved you, a like means more than you might think. And if you want to see what comes next, we will be here.